Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Right.
If you look at the global economy today, it's honestly a lot like a patient who went to a clinic and was prescribed this single one-size-fits-all pill by, a group of Western physicians.
Yeah, a very specific pill.
Exactly. And this pill promised to cure absolutely everything, like stagnation, debt, you name it. But instead of making the patient better, it ended up causing these severe destabilizing side effects.
Especially for the poorest nations.
Right, especially for them. And today we're looking at a series of articles that basically show how the world is dealing with those side effects. So let's start with this pill. What exactly was it?
Well, the pill was the Washington Consensus. If you were paying attention to global economics any time from the late 1980s onward, that phrase was treated like an absolute magic talisman.
Like gospel, basically.
Basically, yeah. It was coined by the economist John Williamson back in 1989, and it was a set of 10 really tidy policy prescriptions. The core mantra was incredibly simple. It was just liberalize, privatize, and deregulate.
Right, but it wasn't just a polite suggestion from the West, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. Institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods institutions, they tied this directly to a country's survival.
Wow.
Yeah, so if a developing nation hit a debt crisis and needed bailout money, they were forced to swallow this pill. They had to slash public spending, fling their markets open to foreign investment, and, sell off state-owned enterprises.
Which raises the question, why were these sweeping rules conceived in Western capitals without any real input from the developing countries that actually had to suffer the side effects?
Well, the foundational belief in those capitals was that free markets would automatically generate growth that trickled down.
Ah, the famous trickle-down effect.
Exactly, meaning short-term inequality was just viewed as an acceptable cost of doing business. But the mechanism of how this actually played out was deeply destabilizing. You cannot force a developing nation into an overnight shift to an idealized free market without the proper institutional foundations.
Right, because if you force a country to privatize state assets, but they don't have a strong regulatory body to prevent monopolies, you don't get a free market.
You just get powerful oligarchs.
Yeah.
And we saw this structural failure trigger the 1997 Asian financial crisis that started in Bangkok, and it laid the groundwork for the massive global financial meltdown in 2008.
And the blowback from that has fundamentally reshaped the world you and I live in today. The reporting we're looking at traces a direct line from those failures to the massive global shifts we are seeing now.
Yeah, it's a direct domino effect.
Right. And just to be clear to the listener, we are just reporting what the source material states here, not taking a political stance. But the articles note that it started with street protests across the global south in the 90s, but that disillusionment eventually fueled massive political realignments globally.
Right.
The resulting inequality energized both anti-capitalist movements on the left and populist movements on the right, which the source directly links to phenomena like MEA in the US and Brexit in the UK.
Yeah, and the irony goes even deeper than that, because the Washington Consensus explicitly banned state-led industrial strategy through all these strict trade rules.
Right.
Yet if we look at the countries that actually succeeded in industrializing, like the United States, Japan, South Korea, none of them used that playbook during their formative years.
Wait, really? They didn't?
No, not at all. Their success was deeply rooted in the exact state-led industrial policies the Consensus tried to outlaw. They heavily protected their infant industries before ever opening up to the world.
Wow. Which brings us to the mid-2020s, where the script has completely flipped.
Yeah.
Because we are now living through what economists are calling the Trump tariff tempest.
An era of sweeping punitive tariffs.
Exactly. So the default global setting has gone from liberalize everything in 1990 to what will protect our borders in 2025. Protectionism is now like a geopolitical battle axe.
It really is.
So for the listener who is just trying to make sense of their investments or their business, what does this all mean for the global economy right now?
It means the myth of a universal ready-made template is just dead. We are now in an era of what economists call pragmatic eclecticism.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's just a fancy way of saying nations are throwing the old rule book out the window and doing whatever it takes to survive. Markets still matter, but governments recognize that supply chains aren't just neutral plumbing anymore.
They're weapons.
Exactly. They are matters of national security. Nations are picking and choosing tools, tariffs, subsidies, strategic decoupling to protect themselves from external shocks.
Okay, so let's unpack that survival instinct. Because with the collapse of this free market global plumbing, nations are scrambling to secure their own lifelines through these very pragmatic bilateral deals.
Right.
Which brings us directly to our second editorial piece today, focusing on India's recent diplomatic pivot, specifically with Canada.
Yeah, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to India, which took place between February 27th and March 2nd of 2026, is really the perfect case study of this new pragmatic geopolitics in action.
For sure.
It marked a remarkable turnaround from the ideological disputes and legacy issues that really bogged down bilateral ties under his predecessor, Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, and when you look at Carney's recent visit, they didn't just exchange pleasantries. I mean, they walked away with 8 hard deliverables.
Right, actual signed agreement.
Exactly. They mapped out a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, or CEPA. But what really caught my eye was the Memorandum of Understanding on Critical Minerals.
Yeah, that's huge.
This is about aligning with the U.S.-led Pax Silica coalition. Can you explain the mechanism behind that for us? What is Pax Silica?
So Pax Silica is essentially a strategic alliance of nations trying to build a secure supply chain for critical technology materials, like the minerals you need for semiconductors and artificial intelligence, that doesn't rely on China.
Ah, I see.
Because after China demonstrated its willingness to restrict access to critical minerals in response to U.S. tariffs, countries like India and Canada realize they have a massive vulnerability. They simply cannot rely on a single, potentially hostile source for the raw materials that literally run the modern world.
Right. But the centerpiece of this visit was actually energy.
Yes.
They signed this massive commercial contract between India's Department of Atomic Energy and Canada's Cameco for uranium ore concentrates. And this ties directly into India's Shanti Bill, the sustainable harnessing and advancement of nuclear energy for transforming India, which aims for 100 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2047.
Right, a massive goal.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If global supply chains are breaking down, as we just discussed, is this uranium deal genuinely about green energy and zero emission targets? Or is it just India aggressively hedging its bets because it can no longer trust the global market for its basic survival?
I mean, the reality is that it serves both purposes, but you're right. The survival aspect is absolutely paramount. India's economic growth absolutely requires clean energy to meet sustainable development goals. However, in an era of unending wars and weaponized trade, relying on external fossil fuels is a critical national security flaw.
Exactly.
So securing a long-term predictable supply of uranium from a friendly, resource-rich nation like Canada is the ultimate defense mechanism. It guarantees India can gradually increase homegrown nuclear energy production without being held hostage by volatile global markets.
And that anxiety about external reliance is incredibly well-founded. Because when the global plumbing breaks down, it's not just abstract trade routes that suffer. Real human lives get caught in the crossfire.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to our Ground Zero article, looking at what is unfolding in West Asia right now. You know, the Gulf is essentially the engine room of the global economy, but for millions of Indians, it's just their daily workplace.
Yeah, it's where they make a living.
Exactly. And right now, that workplace is an active war zone. Just how many people are we talking about here?
The numbers are staggering. There are currently between 90 lakh and 1 crore Indian expats living in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries.
Wow. Up to 1 crore.
Yeah, it is the largest foreign workforce in the entire region. Furthermore, the Indian workforce in Israel alone jumped to about 30,000 blue-collar workers, mostly in agriculture and construction, just since late 2023.
And right now, they're sitting in the middle of an unprecedented conflict.
Right.
We are looking at a war in 2026 involving Israel and the U.S. against Iran and its allies, which was triggered by the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Yeah, and the retaliation was massive.
Exactly. Iran retaliated by firing missiles and drones across a massive strike range that includes U.S. bases in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel.
And to understand why you, as a listener, should care about this macro conflict, you just have to look at the terrifying daily reality for the individuals trapped there.
Yeah, like Pudi Prakash.
Exactly. She's a travel blogger. Her flight to Dubai was rerouted midair as missiles literally flew across the airspace. She lands in Dubai, which is supposed to be this, global paradise of consumerism, and instead, the sky is filled with sirens.
Just terrifying.
Flights are completely grounded. And to make matters worse, some hotels are actively price gouging, charging stranded tourists extra for overstaying.
And for the workers in Israel, the situation is even more dire. I mean, Brimohan Singh Raghuvanshi, an Indian journalist who was trapped in Tel Aviv, he reported hearing Iranian missiles actually evading Israel's famed Iron Dome defense system.
Right, which is supposed to be impenetrable.
Yeah, and he pointed out something deeply concerning. Under the current emergency rules there, verifiable casualty figures are being hidden from the public.
Wow.
He visited a site where 4 buildings were turned to absolute rubble, and the authorities claimed only 1 person died, which the local residents vehemently disputed.
That's incredibly dark.
Meanwhile, the sheer cost of survival has skyrocketed. Raghuvanshi noted that a single bottle of water was costing 12 shekels, which is roughly 350 rupees.
350 rupees for water.
Yeah. And tragically, we've already seen fatalities. Indian captain Ashish Kumar was killed aboard the merchant vessel Skylight when it was targeted in the Strait of Hormuz.
And this creates a logistical nightmare of terrifying proportions for the Indian government.
I can't even imagine.
I mean, while they're issuing advisories and holding emergency phone calls with the Iranian foreign minister, you simply cannot evacuate 1 crore people overnight.
No, of course not.
The infrastructure to do so just does not exist. Furthermore, this conflict is fundamentally altering the geopolitical architecture of the region. Arab states are now actively doubting U.S. security commitments.
Right, because of what happened in Doha.
Exactly. After an Israeli attack took place in Doha, Qatar, September 2025, these Arab nations are realizing that hosting U.S. military bases brings them directly into the line of fire without actually guaranteeing their own protection.
Right. So, if you are sitting at home wondering, with missiles flying, airspace closed, and a bottle of water costing 350 rupees, why on earth do millions of Indians still take this immense risk?
It's a really important question.
Yeah, and to answer that, we have to transition to our spotlight section and zoom in from the grand geopolitical chessboard to a single village in Odisha.
We're looking at Manakapur village in the Ganjam district. It has about 750 households, and almost every single one has a family member working in the Gulf.
Every single one.
Practically, yeah. And the daily reality there is incredibly tense. You have 50-year-old mothers like Namita Singh, who used to spend her evenings watching entertainment channels. Now she is glued to the news, learning to identify the visual difference between an incoming missile and falling debris on her TV screen because her 2 sons are working in Jordan.
God, that's heartbreaking. And when you look at the conditions her sons are actually enduring, the sacrifice is immense.
It really is.
A 23-year-old worker named Ajay described his daily routine for the article. Working 12 to 13-hour shifts in blistering heat, and then going home to squeeze 8 people into a single 120-square-foot room filled with bunk beds.
8 people in 120 square feet.
Yeah. And they endure all of this just to save and send back between 20,000 and 60,000 rupees a month. It's a tragic paradox, really. These young men are sacrificing the best years of their youth to build beautiful concrete mansions back home, but to afford them, they're sleeping in cramped bunk beds in an active war zone. Why is the societal pressure to do this so intense?
Well, it comes down to the mechanism of social mobility and the collapse of local agriculture. Experts from NGOs like Aid or Action point out that local livelihood programs and domestic employment opportunities in these areas simply aren't robust enough.
Right, farming just doesn't pay the bills.
Exactly. Marginal farming cannot sustain a family anymore. So how do you signal success in Manakapur? You build a flashy 2-story concrete house with a tiled facade. But more importantly, you have to fund incredibly expensive, socially mandated marriages.
Dowries, right.
Yeah. Dowries in this area have evolved into this massive arms race, ranging from 1 lakh to 5 lakh rupees, plus gold, furniture, and large community feasts. One 65-year-old woman noted she spent 7 lakh and 9 lakh rupees on her daughter's marriages decades ago and struggled for years to repay the debt.
Wow.
So international migration is the only way these families can self-finance their social survival.
And the emotional toll of this system is just as heavy as the financial one. Young wives are left behind, managing households, aging in-laws, and children entirely alone for years at a time.
Yeah.
The Odisha Parivar Directorate, which was set up to help migrants in distress, has been receiving hundreds of desperate calls. But here's the most devastating trap. Even if these workers see the bombs falling and want to flee, they usually can't.
Right, because of their passports.
Exactly. Their passports are routinely confiscated and held by their employers, making an emergency return practically impossible unless the employer graciously agrees to let them leave.
It really highlights a profound domestic failure. People are leaving their homes and risking their lives in foreign wars because they are desperately seeking better infrastructure and prosperity for their families.
Yeah.
But that raises a critical question. What happens when the very infrastructure in India's own booming, prosperous tech hubs fails the people who actually live and work there?
Right. Which brings us to our next spotlight article, looking at the city of Bengaluru. Imagine you are paying a massive premium in taxes to live in a city building a world-class metro system, but you're still sitting in an hour and a half of snarling traffic every single day.
It's incredibly frustrating.
That's the reality for millions in Bengaluru right now.
Yeah, Bengaluru's Nama Metro presents this fascinating and frustrating paradox. It is the second largest metro network in India, with 96 kilometers of operational track. But it's also the most expensive.
How expensive are we talking?
They have spent an astonishing 67,460 crore rupees building it, yet traffic congestion remains among the absolute worst in the world.
Let's contextualize those numbers because they are staggering. So we've spent nearly 67,000 crore rupees to build a system that actively takes twice as long as a cab.
Pretty much.
Let's look at a commuter featured in the reporting, Hasta Shetty. It takes her 1 hour and 50 minutes, requiring 4 different line and mode changes to get to work using the metro. A regular cab ride takes her 50 minutes. Why on earth did we build a multi-billion-dollar train set that completely fails actual commuters? It sounds like we built it for political optics.
Well, the core failure lies in the mechanism of political lobbying versus actual urban planning. When you build a transit system, you should follow the data to see where people actually need to go.
Right, logically.
But instead, politicians aggressively lobbied to alter the early phases of the metro routes. They pushed the tracks into their own voting strongholds or into areas where they held lucrative real estate interests, despite those areas having comparatively lower commuter demand.
That's infuriating.
Meanwhile, massive employment hubs, like the Outer Ring Road, which houses gigantic tech parks and hundreds of thousands of workers, were completely neglected.
Wow.
Because tech workers don't form a consolidated, localized vote bank, that vital corridor isn't expected to get operational metro connectivity until 2027.
And because of this political meddling, the costs just kept spiraling out of control. The article mentions Phase 1 was originally supposed to cost 6,395 crore rupees. It ended up costing 14,405 crore.
More than double.
Yeah. And Phase 2 jumped from 26,000 crore to over 40,000 crore. And it's important to remember, a huge portion of this is funded by international loans from agencies like JICA and the Asian Development Bank.
And this is where the compounding dangers of debt-funded infrastructure become apparent. When political interference delays construction by years, the interest payments on those massive foreign loans just balloon.
Right.
The authority that was created specifically to prevent this kind of ad hoc political interference, the Bengaluru Metropolitan Land Transport Authority, or BMLTA, simply hasn't been empowered enough by the state to actually stop it.
And who ultimately pays the price for this mismanagement? You do. The commuter.
Exactly.
A 2023 study by the Bengaluru Political Action Committee, BPAC, found that 95% of private vehicle users would willingly switch to the metro if reliable last-mile connectivity actually existed.
95%, that's huge.
It is. But instead of fixing that connectivity, the metro simply hiked fares last year, sometimes by up to 100%. They ignored basic financial tools that other global cities use, like what about land value capture?
Right. Land value capture is essentially a mechanism where the city taxes the inevitable spike in commercial real estate prices that happens around newly built metro stations, and they use that revenue to help pay for the tracks.
Makes sense.
Because Bengaluru failed to implement global best practices like this to offset construction costs, the massive financial burden falls entirely on the fare-paying citizens.
Yeah.
If fares double while the convenience remains practically non-existent, people will just stay in their cars, completely defeating the purpose of a 67,000 crore investment.
Bengaluru really shows us the pitfalls of mismanaged, flashy mega projects. But sometimes the most critical urban infrastructure isn't a shiny new rail line. It's a quiet, peeling building right in your neighborhood.
That's a great point.
Let's look at our final spotlight article, focusing on Hyderabad. If Hyderabad's famous corporate hospitals are the luxury sports cars of the medical world, these neighborhood clinics are the sturdy, battered bicycles.
I like that analogy.
They don't look glamorous, but because they are decentralized and embedded directly in the neighborhoods, they can maneuver through the narrow alleys of a public health crisis that the sports cars can't even reach. They are what actually get the masses where they need to go.
That is a vital distinction. While Hyderabad is famous globally for its towering corporate hospitals and booming medical tourism, the true backbone of healthcare for the masses lies in places like the Urban Primary Health Center at Darul Shifa in the Old City.
Hmm.
It's housed in an aging Nizam-era building with peeling plaster, sitting right in the middle of chaotic, snarling traffic. But it works. The reporting shares the story of Asma Fatima, who receives excellent, entirely free antenatal care there.
Which is life-changing for them.
Exactly.
Hmm.
For families living on modest incomes, going to a private multi-specialty hospital for a routine checkup or childhood vaccines would completely break the bank.
And the scale of this decentralized network is massive. There are about 85 UPHCs in the Hyderabad district alone, and they are supported by a network of even smaller neighborhood clinics called Basti Dawakhanas.
Yeah.
Mushtaba Hassan Askari, who works extensively on healthcare access, emphasizes how crucial this is. People need to be able to simply walk to their nearest facility. These centers act as the first line of defense for everything from maternal health to early screening for diabetes.
They do.
But the strain on these bicycles is immense. I mean, the medical officer at Darul Shifa noted that they actually had to stop conducting child deliveries 4 years ago simply because the physical infrastructure of the building was failing.
But the infrastructure is only half the story, right? The real mechanism keeping this entire system afloat is human labor.
The ASA workers.
Exactly. The entire public health system relies heavily on ASA workers, accredited social health activists. They aren't just medical staff. They're the social glue.
Yeah.
They're the ones going deep into the slums, mobilizing the community, and convincing a sometimes skeptical public to show up for immunizations and health programs. They are the vital bridge between the public and the state.
But they're not even getting paid.
No.
Yeah.
The reporting highlights an ASA worker who hasn't been paid her salary in nearly 2 months. The entire safety net of a sprawling megacity is resting squarely on the shoulders of underpaid, overworked frontline staff operating out of crumbling buildings.
It's wild. And it leaves you with something profound to think about before we wrap up today. We live in a world obsessed with grand designs. From the Washington consensus trying to dictate global markets from a boardroom to multi-billion-dollar metros built for political optics and high-tech corporate hospitals catering to the elite. Yet, whether it's an Odia migrant navigating an active war zone to provide a dowry for his family, a commuter dodging traffic because a 67,000 crore train refuses to go to her office, or an ESHA worker delivering critical medical care for 2 months without a paycheck, the real engine of our world isn't the grand system.
No, it's not.
It's the quiet resilience of ordinary people waking up every single day and making the broken plumbing work.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we're eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.